This is Box Office Bob-ombs. If your movie is based on a video game, chances are it's gonna blow. With me is a man whose cinematic expertise is worth his own weight in bison bucks. And that's a lot of bison bucks. Dillon Flynn.
And across the aisle for me, a man who reminds me so much of Street Fighter 3. Everyone spent years wondering when he would finally come out. He has no guile, but if you want to grab his joystick and jerk it around for a few minutes, it'll only cost you 50 cents. Mr. Trevor Ickrath.
And those are the kind of high quality roasts that I guess can only be achieved having deep knowledge of the franchise that we're here to talk about today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like on some level, at least we are more Street Fighter experts sitting here today than we were last week.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it was nice to refamiliarize myself with the cast. I now know what all of them do for a living, I guess, which I didn't know before. But I assume everything we saw in the movie that we watched for today's episode is canon to their backstories in the games.
Hey, just like my favorite military forces, the Street Fighter movie is 100% canon.
Awesome. I wanted to kind of get your temperature on how you're feeling about the previous movies that we've watched for the program so far, though. Like, have you found yourself returning at all, even in your thoughts, to Super Mario Bros. Or Double Dragon?
Only in, assessing each new movie do I somewhat reflect on the old ones. But to be honest, it mostly just is a relief to have them behind me at the end of these.
I agree. In one ear, out the other for me, for the most part.
Yeah.
Although it's hard not to think about them while watching, each new movie, because still I find that they continue to have a lot in common with each other.
Yeah, what is that? Is there something?
It's very strange.
Is there something about making a video game movie where you seem to be falling into these tropes, or was the state of just genre fiction and action adventure films in the 90s kind of this rote where everybody was working with the same, general tropes?
It seems like in all these things, there are always two guys, right?
Yeah.
And that just must be a result of video games in this era being one or two player games. That was kind of what you had back then, like the Mario Brothers. There was, Ken and Ryu. But, let's see what this week's examples are going to be. Let's talk more specifically about what movie we're here to review. 1994's Street Fighter.
In December 1994, the forces of freedom will face a power-mad dictator in a struggle for the fate of the world.
Why is he jumping?
Teach him a lesson, Mike. Teach him a lesson, Mike. Get him.
What is happening? The leg!
Correct. Released by Universal Pictures on December 23rd, 1994. That's a scant 7 weeks after last week's movie, Double Dragon, came out.
That's crazy. America was gripped by video game movie fever this year.
Yeah, I mean, conceivably on Christmas weekend 94, you could have done a double feature. You could have gone to see Double Dragon and Street Fighter back to back to back.
Pretty much the closest you would get to something like Barbenheimer back in the day.
Oh, I long to go back to the days of Barbenheimer. That was not fatiguing at all.
Simpler times.
This film was based, of course, on the arcade game Street Fighter, published by Capcom in 1987.
Actually, it was based on Street Fighter 2.
There's more Street Fighter 2 in this thing than Street Fighter 1. There's also money in this thing. The movie cost $35 million to produce, and then it earned $99.4 million internationally, Trevor.
Damn. Is this the first movie we've talked about that actually made its money back?
It did. They say there's a classic rule of thumb for how to break even with your movie. You have to make 2.5 times your budget, which would have been $87.5 million. So you got $10 million of profit there.
Pretty interesting. This wasn't the biggest, it didn't have the most screens, though, of the movies we talked about. It opened on 1,671 screens.
More than Double Dragon opened on and less than Mario opened on.
Yeah, Mario was 2,081. Double Dragon was 1,087.
It was the feature directorial debut of Stephen E. D'Souza, the acclaimed screenwriter of many 80s blockbusters, including Die Hard and 48 Hours, and one of my favorites, Commando.
That tracks to me. Yeah, I could see this being by the guy who wrote Die Hard for sure. There's a lot of Die Hard and just 80s action espionage movie DNA in this thing in general.
This film was produced and also mostly financed entirely by Capcom, who were very, very hands-on. Every creative decision had to get Capcom's full approval.
It's interesting because they were, you take a look at this movie as an example where the video game company was extremely hands-on versus the Super Mario Bros. Movie where Nintendo was just basically like, let them cook, whatever you guys want to do, that's okay with us. I feel like they kind of turned out the same thing, right? In terms of products that bear resemblance to the thing that they're adapted from.
Yeah, I mean, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I suppose, right?
Really, it's just a message that I feel like you don't need to worry about it too much at all. Just come out in the wash.
I'm going to break the plot down for you real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just so you have some frame of reference.
Dylan, break this plot down for me like two men in karate gis breaking down a broken car for bonus points.
Until it fucking explodes.
I can't believe that wasn't in the movie. How do you not put that in the Street Fighter movie? We'll talk about it.
Yeah, that would have been some good fan service. General M. Bison has kidnapped 63 international relief workers, and he will kill them all in 3 days, unless the Allied nations pays him $20 billion in ransom money. Enter Colonel William F. Guile, who will lead a gang of ragtag freedom fighters to rescue those hostages and defeat the Mad General.
Interesting that you didn't mention really any street fighting in there.
Well,
I assume it must happen though at some point. There's got to be some street fighting in this movie, right?
Well, I'll tell you what this movie does have a fucking ton of characters.
Yeah, I was reading through the notes you prepared, like just going through all these names. I was thinking like, do we really need to read all of these people? And I feel like it almost would be worth it because it's interesting, like seeing how they like took the cast of Street Fighter and assigned everybody different roles in a movie that is very much not about just people fighting in the street. Like it's almost like an example of what like people so frequently do in fan fiction, where they will take like characters from a property they love and like make them all work in like a coffee shop or something.
Totally.
This is very much like the Street Fighter journalism AU and the Street Fighter like street hustling AU all coming together and to one big like Street Fighter extravaganza.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's 15 characters
That's wild.
From the games in this movie. And I thought, to help kind of keep them all straight, I don't even know if it's going to help, but I kind of broke them into like categories of characters because they do kind of team up. They form little teams.
So I guess let's go through it. The first little group we've got to discuss is the Allied Nations Forces, which is kind of like almost, it seems to be like a militarized UN kind of.
It's like there's something like very gently fascist about it, but the movie's not really interested in politics.
Yeah. So first we've got to talk about him, Colonel Guile. He's an elite all-American soldier who can't wait to punch the bad guy, played by none other than the movie's big star, really, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the Belgian martial artist and then Hollywood superstar.
Yeah, certainly the most all-American leading man I can think of, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there are very much two big performances in this movie. And for me, at least, they fell at like polar opposite ends of like the quality spectrum.
Totally. Right at his side, you've got Lieutenant Cammy White, Guile's British second in command, played by Kylie Minogue.
Australian pop idol of Can't Get You Out of My Head fame. Although I think it's worth noting, and this kind of blew my mind when I realized it. This was like 6 or 7 years before Can't Get You Out of My Head even came out. So like she was nothing at this point.
I think she must have had some kind of presence in Australia.
Yeah. But here she's not even playing an Australian. She has to do what I assume is like, race traitorism for an Australian person.
Oi, governor!
Yeah, place a British person.
Cup of tea!
Kind of shameless.
Sergeant Carlos Charlie Blanca, Guile's war buddy who is captured and then brutally transformed into a mean green killing machine, played by Robert Mamone.
kind of one of the big hooks of the movie, at least for me. Like, just another thing that all of these movies have in common.
Oh, yeah.
Is a character being forced into some kind of device and being fundamentally changed into some
by
kind
the bad guy, by the villain.
I know, it's ridiculous that it's happened all 3 times.
Will it continue? How long can we keep this streak up? I wonder.
We'll have to see.
We can't forget Sergeant Thunderhawk, Trevor.
Real quick before we move on to Sergeant Thunderhawk, who I don't even remember being in the movie, but real quick before we move on, just sitting there on the couch waiting this entire movie to see what Blanco was going to look like when he finally came out of this machine was one of the main things that kept me watching for sure. Because I knew they weren't going to land it. It wasn't going to look good at all, but I had to see like what it was going to turn out to be.
What's this Blanco reveal going to look like? Yeah. Sergeant Thunderhawk, how could you forget him, Trevor? Oftentimes when Colonel Guile is standing there, you got Cammy standing next to him and then another guy standing next to him. And then like very late in the movie, he's like, "Hey, Thunderhawk, why do you wear that thing?" And he's like, "Oh, it's from my tribe."
Oh, damn. I do remember that now that you pointed out. Yeah.
Jesus Christ, you were Thunderhawk the whole time? That's funny.
Yeah. Played by Greg Rainwater, who I have to imagine is a genuine Native American person.
I appreciate that. I mean, if they're going to let Australian play British, at the very least, they're thinking about this on some of the times, you know?
Yeah. And, he even got to talk about his own culture. They didn't allow Kylie Minogue to have like a little side where she like throws some shrimp on a Barbie or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
Next, we've got a group. Did you come up with this name or is this said at some point in the movie?
He believes that his future empire will be called this, I believe.
Gotcha. The Pax by Sonica.
All of the baddies who are organized behind one big baddie, General M. Bison, a deranged former drug lord with dreams of world domination, played by Raul Julia.
Right, Gomez Addams in the Addams Family movies, if you're unfamiliar.
That's right.
This is really, I think, the other big performance in the movie. And
Definitely.
As bad as the Van Damme performance is, this one is that good, I think. This performance was kind of what I knew about the movie going in, and I think it did like genuinely live up to the hype.
Totally. At his side, you got Zangief, a big, beefy Russian henchman who's a little bit more brawn than he is brains, played by Andrew Bryniarski in a really impeccable piece of physical casting.
Yeah, this guy looked great. He's probably the best like 1-for-1 match with his video game character. At least the one that they have to do the least amount of work to get there, I would say.
Totally.
Because
Yeah.
Bison looks great, but there's so much costuming going on there.
Right.
Zangief is just a big fucking Russian dude who looks like the guy from the game.
He does just look like the guy from the game. And also you got DJ, a wisecracking Jamaican tech whiz, played by Miguel A. Nunez Jr.
This guy was pretty good. I enjoyed him.
He's got some very funny like background work going on in this movie.
These movies kind of live or die by how funny the main villains, 2 or 3 right-hand men are.
You're not wrong at all.
Yeah.
And finally, I'll throw him in here. Dr. Dalsim, an enslaved scientist from India with a strong moral compass, played by Roshan Seth. Now, I don't know where else we would talk about this, but there is a moment near the end where Dalsim now kind of looks like he does in the games, like he loses his hair.
Yeah.
Did you understand why that happened?
I didn't, and I didn't even necessarily like it. You've pointed it out to me now, but I didn't even necessarily realize it was that character. Like, it was Dalsim earning his baldness, which is so fucking stupid that they had to do. I have to imagine, like, out of all the characters in this movie, in these games, if you're a Dalsim head, like, going in, you have to feel the most shafted out of everyone.
Oh,
like, I cannot
for
wait
sure.
to go to this movie, see my boy spit some fire, use his stretchy limbs, and instead he is a scientist who just, like, is shackled to a computer.
Yeah, I know. What a bummer. That's what's happening over at Bison headquarters, but let's take a look at Team Shoryuken.
Yeah, this I feel like this is kind of the most like there is the most wasted potential in this part of the movie for me. Here we've got is it Ryu or Ryu?
Well, if you ask 90% of the cast of this movie, it's
Yeah.
Ryu.
Uh-huh.
Raul Julia says Ryu, and that is canonically how you're supposed to say it, Ryu.
Clearly the only one who did any sort of prep. But yeah, we've got, I'm going to call him Ryu. Ryu Hoshi and Ken Majors, best friends, martial artists, and hustlers with hearts of gold. They're played by Byron Mann and Damian Chapa, respectively.
Yeah, the boys, they are here.
Yeah. Our requisite two guys.
It's a Guile movie. It's not a Ken and Ryu movie. So,
which feels like a weird choice to make for the Street Fighter film, but I guess I get it, considering they were going for more of an American audience, maybe?
For sure. The GNT News crew, including front and center, Chun-Li Zhang, a TV reporter from China who is out to avenge her father's murder, played by Ming-Na Wen, who had a pretty huge career. I know her best as the voice of Mulan, but I think she was like the main character on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
That's pretty cool. Chun-Li, kind of a mixed bag in how they handle her, because, she'd like not the most dignified role, but she also does get to do some of the very few street fighting in the movie.
At her side, Edmund Honda, a former Hawaiian sumo wrestler now working as Chun-Li's news director, played by Peter Tuiasosopo.
This guy seems like a good hang. Like, if there was a character that was in the movie maybe 20% more, I could see him improving it.
He's also got good bro energy with Gerard Balrog.
Yeah. If this had been a Honda Balrog movie, maybe it would have been better for me.
Totally. A former boxer now working as Chun-Li's cameraman, played by Grand L. Bush.
I don't know how deep into the Street Fighter lore you are, but I believe as a result of translation nonsense, in Japan, M. Bison's character is actually named Balrog, and Balrog's character is actually named M. Bison, which I think tracks a lot better with who those characters are.
I think M. Bison, the reason that he is a black boxer is that his name was Mike Bison, and it was like a joke about Mike Tyson's name.
There you go. That works great. Come on.
We're almost done. We only have 2 more characters.
Right. Next, we've got the Shadaloo Mafia. Last, we've got the Shadaloo Mafia, starting with Victor Sagat, a powerful crime boss from Thailand, played by Wes Studi, Al Pacino's partner in Heat.
Yeah, that's what I know him best from, but he's like a character actor who's been in a bajillion things, that guy.
He held his own in this. He's not I don't think he gives the best performance, but I think he is able to hold on to a lot of dignity in his role.
Another person who I would argue holds his own despite not getting a single line of dialogue is Vega, a vain and beautiful Spanish prizefighter played by Jay Tavares.
Sure, another character that I think many would argue is underutilized, although I don't really need Vega to be talking.
No, me either. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's a likable presence in this movie to me. I might have found a lot to like here, but perhaps I'm a little bit out on a limb.
Sure. Yeah. I've been wondering how you were going to come down on this, because I really do feel like people could easily go both ways, and more so than any movie that we talked about yet. This is a movie where I think your mileage will vary. But if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes score and both the critic and the user score, a lot of what has been officially documented has been not favorable.
That's right, an 11% critic score, a 20% user score. So in both of those categories, that's the lowest we've seen on this show so far.
I don't know if I liked this materially less than Double Dragon, but I could see why it went down as, the lowest scored one.
I suppose. Can you read us some review quotes?
Sure, yeah. David Cronk of the Los Angeles Times certainly was not pulling any punches. He called it a movie pitched at the subliterate set that, with glassy eyes, unthinkingly pumps quarter after quarter into video games.
Ugh, so derisive.
Yeah, I still love all this vintage video game imagery that the critics of the era could not resist filling the reviews with, spending dollars on cartridges, pumping quarters after quarters, and
Yeah.
it's great. It's great.
They're just dogpiling on these gamer kids.
Rotten Tomatoes user William S. was even more brutal. He called it an absolute complete load of fucking arse and sweaty balls. Sex with a hyena would almost be preferable to this nightmarish experience. Enough.
He got fucking tight about it, William S.
Yeah, he was worked up.
I think it's you said your mileage will vary. I think it kind of depends on why you're coming to Street Fighter the movie. If you're coming to Street Fighter the movie because you love Street Fighter and are hoping to see it realized on the big screen, you're probably not going to have a great time.
I would also argue that if you were completely unfamiliar with Street Fighter, and just kind of want a good movie to watch, you're also not going to have a good time.
What a great segue into what I wanted to talk to you about, which is your personal relationship with Street Fighter, journey with Street Fighter. I know you haven't seen this movie before, but for God's sakes, you know what Street Fighter is.
Sure, yeah, I definitely knew what Street Fighter was. I've known what Street Fighter was from a very young age. My earliest exposure to the game, I think, was a Street Fighter cabinet. I can't remember if it was the original or if it was Street Fighter 2. A Street Fighter cabinet in the Pizza Hut closest to my elementary school and my high school.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the one where they fight on like the rooftop of like a martial arts studio at night.
2, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Let's call it 2. So that thing had Street Fighter 2 in it for a while. I think it eventually got replaced by like the X-Men or something, which I liked a lot better because I was never good at the like simple 2D fighter games as a kid. I couldn't do the combos. I like couldn't figure out how to block or just any kind of strategy.
Yeah.
It wasn't until like Super Smash Brothers came out that I found like a fighting game that I actually could figure out how to play. But I definitely always liked Street Fighter more than Mortal Kombat as a kid, with which I was forbidden from playing because it was way too violent for me.
Me too.
And even now as an adult, I agree that that game is still way too violent for me. I think Street Fighter strikes a much better balance in terms of like fun action combat and like, you know, enjoyable violence. Nobody's getting their spine ripped out in a Street Fighter game, you know?
Totally. Yeah, my experience with Street Fighter as a child is just too hard. Can't seem to get my hooks in it.
It's not a kid's game.
Think it looks cool, you know, think the music is cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool people in my life, other kids, slightly older kids who really love it, who I look up to. Last year, I got really into Street Fighter 6. That's like the most I've been into Street Fighter.
I remember this.
And I actually think that served me great for this movie because what it gave me was like a decent familiarity with the personalities of the classic Street Fighter characters without feeling overly invested in their like canon journeys, you know?
Did you have any existing context for this movie before sitting down to watch it for the show?
Again, definitely would see it on the fucking wall at the Blockbuster. I think what turned me off from it, though, was just how much that cover is just like fucking Jean-Claude Van Damme. Look at this lantern-jawed muscle man. This does not seem like a movie I'm going to enjoy.
I remember my like I think I've briefly mentioned I would regularly come across on the internet, I think, people talking about like specifically Raul Julia's performance in this movie and how he recorded it basically on like death's door, and he turned in this amazing performance that went like way harder than he needed to go for this like dumbass Street Fighter movie.
Right,
so I like
right.
had heard about it, and I feel like I had even seen clips of it and like other parts of the movie, like on an overhead TV at like Suncoast Video, which my father would regularly take me to when I was a kid.
I don't think that I had any of that context going into this. There was a line of dialogue, the most famous line of dialogue in this movie that I realized I had heard before.
Oh yeah. I also I think I know what you're talking about. When that hit, I was like, oh dang, yeah, I was aware of this one too.
But yeah, other than that, no, nothing.
Cool. All right, well, let's talk about the production then.
Kind of interesting to me how Steven D'Souza gets into play here. Producers at Capcom approached him to write the screenplay, since that's his track record. And Steven had already played the arcade game and considered himself to be a fan of the game, but he said he was not interested in writing unless he could also direct the movie.
You want complete control.
This was, I guess, at like a general meeting, and Capcom's representatives were only going to be in Los Angeles, in America, for one day. Mm-hmm. But they said they would consider letting him direct the movie if he could pitch a story that like the senior execs in Japan were into. So Steven ran home and he wrote the first draft of Street Fighter in a single night.
Wow.
And then ran it over to the producers at their hotel the next morning before they got on their return flight. And I guess this was impressive enough to the suits at Capcom that they gave him the job.
Do you think they read the script and they were like, he did all this in one night, we got to give it to him? Or do you think he just gave him the
Or
script and
were
they
they
were
just
like,
like-
wow, he wrote a whole script he wrote a whole movie in one night. Can you believe that? This has got to be our guy.
Yeah, maybe it was that. I wonder if the passion was really what won him the job, I wonder.
Well, speaking about passion, we've got some on-set passion to talk about.
Oh, no kidding.
One thing Capcom was adamant about was that Jean-Claude Van Damme must play Guile. And they wound up devoting a whole $8 million of the movie's $45 million budget just to his salary.
Wow.
When he got on set, he was allegedly very difficult to work with. He would refuse to come to the set. He would hunker down in his gym to tone his physique. And by his own admission, he was spending $10,000 per week on cocaine throughout the entire production.
He was 10 grams a day he was snorting, Trevor.
Nice. Not only that, it wasn't just 10 grams of cocaine he was snorting every day. There was also a little Kylie Minogue making its way into the mix. He was having an on-set affair with her, cheating on his then-wife, actress Darcy Lapierre, who was, at the time, pregnant with his child back home in Brussels.
Well, if you're a action movie star, I guess that means you do a lot of cocaine, you cheat on your wife, and you refuse to shoot your scenes because you want your muscles to look better.
Dudes rock.
Dudes rock. And speaking of a dude who truly rocks, Street Fighter was, as we've mentioned, Raul Julia's final screen performance. During filming, he was near the end of a 3-year battle with stomach cancer. He was recovering from surgery when production was starting, and I guess director Steven D'Souza kind of took one look at him and thought he looked so frail and unwell that he totally rearranged the filming schedule of the movie at the last second so that he could do all of the Bison stuff last, kind of hoping he could give Raul a few extra weeks to kind of get back up to strength. And this caused a ton of calamity with the production. Some of the fight scenes would be shot with actors who had had like maybe one training session or no training sessions. But you can't argue with results. Despite his illness, Raul Julia was very, very dedicated to his process and to the character. He did extensive research into various dictators and crime lords to try and incorporate their mannerisms into his performance. And even though critics panned the film, that performance has received a lot of praise over the years, and he was even posthumously nominated for a Saturn Award for Best Actor for his work.
Like I've said, so far all these video game movies have been movies about two guys, but I feel like here the Ryu and Ken two-guy dichotomy is almost a red herring, and the real two guys of this movie are Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia, the latter of whom, is at death's door, turning in a performance that is way too good for the material that he's spending his final days working on. The other, a dude who is blowing through $10,000 of cocaine per week and banging a yet-to-be very successful pop star behind his pregnant wife's back.
Yep.
And I feel like the energy behind those two dudes is mirrored in the quality of their performances on screen almost.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Let's start reviewing the movie. We, on this show, rather than making you listen to a scene-by-scene breakdown of a movie, we do a tier list where we put the things that we felt strongest about in the movie in tiers, ranging from F to S.
That's right. And this week, it is my turn to fill out our F tier.
That's right. Trevor, what is the worst thing about Street Fighter? What goes into the F tier?
For this one, I think the worst thing about this movie by far is the utter lack of street fighting throughout it.
Yeah.
There really is not any like hand-to-hand combat, I feel like, for the duration of like the first like 2/3 of this movie. At the end, you finally get some actual fighting. But for the first 2/3, that just really doesn't happen. There's a particularly egregious instance that I want to talk about. It's shortly after Ryu and Ken have been apprehended by Sagat, and he's going to kind of punish them by subjecting them to a duel with like his most powerful cage fighter, Vega.
And you get this real intense setup, too.
There is like no less than 5 minutes devoted to them setting up this fight, getting Ryu and Vega into the ring, having them choose their weapons, all this hype around Vega about what a great fighter he is.
There's that kind of awesomely directed sequence too where it keeps cutting to the clock ticking down to when the fight's going to start and like their faces and all that stuff.
Getting you really amped up for some good street fighting. They're there in the cage. It's two guys you know and love about to go at it. Then at the very last second, right as they're about to throw down, it doesn't happen. They get broken up by the police and everyone gets arrested.
Yeah, Guile crashes through the wall in a tank and he's like, everyone's under arrest.
Yeah, fucking Guile. It sucks. And I feel like, it's not until the final act of the movie, by which point I'm very checked out, that people start throwing hands. And, by that point, it's really just too little too late for me. So, yeah, utter lack of street fighting in the F tier.
I'll take the D tier. I'm going to put abandoning Chun-Li's arc entirely in the third act.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
As fun as it is for the little moments where you're like, oh man, that's Thunderhawk. What the fuck? That's Balrog. 15 characters is a very unwieldy tower to try to build a script on, to try to make sure that everyone gets a little something, some setup and some payoff.
I would argue that even though you have all those characters, you only need to give a real genuine arc to a small handful of them.
I agree. Some of the characters really get shortchanged. Cammy, we mentioned Blanca and Dalsim, that whole B plot doesn't really have a lot to do here.
But Chun-Li is one of the main Street Fighter characters.
And it's the one that's the most frustrating here because, at least to me, in Act 1 and 2, the script really works to establish her as one of the big characters. There's she gets a little twist in the second act where you learn that her being a journalist is a big cover, that she's really just trying to get close to Bison, and that she and Bison have the centerpiece scene of the movie, that conversation with the really famous line in it. And she just, after that, kind of steps aside and does nothing while Guile and Bison punch each other at the end. Guile wants to fight Bison because he's the good guy and Bison is the bad guy, but Chun-Li actually had a motive and a reason for me to feel invested. So I don't know. It's just weird that they gave her so much exposition and got me kind of on her side, in her corner, and then really completely forgot about her.
That final exchange between Guile and Chun-Li also really adds insult to injury, where she asks him if she can finally get that interview, and he's like, only if you wear that dress, and everyone laughs. I feel like if I was an actress in 1994 playing Chun-Li, thinking that maybe I was going to be playing a strong female character that little girls in the audience could look up to as a role model, and then I read through the script and I saw that was where my character wound up, I feel like on the day that we had to record that scene, I would have gone back to my trailer and cried.
The C tier, these middle tiers, C and B, I feel like I'm still wrapping my head around what they mean. What did you come up with for the C tier, Trevor?
So for the C tier, I'm gonna give this one to the fact that it only takes about half the movie to get Ryu and Ken into their outfits from the video games.
Yep. 45 minutes, I believe, is the official timestamp when they're in the gis.
Yeah, Super Mario Bros. And Double Dragon, they both had terminal cases of Surf Dracula. They made us wait until the final scene of the movie to actually show us the characters as we're familiar with them. So it was nice to finally see a movie realize you don't have to wait for the final sequence to actually make things look like the game you're adapting.
The gis also look pretty good.
They look okay. I stuck this in the C tier because I thought they could have looked better.
Yeah, I suppose so. But obviously what this movie is Surf Dracula-ing is the fighting. Right?
Just, the street fighting itself, which fucking sucks.
It is very silly.
Yeah.
Good pick, though. I like that we're seeing some progress of getting the motherfuckers in the costumes. Bison's already in the costume. Chun-Li gets into her red from the New Challengers version of her costume.
Oh, I was wondering what was going on with her. I feel like you gotta, that didn't scan at all for me. You gotta do blue.
Guile's got the blue and black camo on. That obviously Capcom is making approval on some of these choices. You can see it.
Yeah.
I have the B tier this week, and I decided that to me, what the B tier is a thing that is just over the line into I consider it good. Okay.
Okay.
So here's what my controversial pick. I am putting in the B tier, spending 18% of this movie's budget to hire Jean-Claude Van Damme to play Guile.
He definitely brings a very specific flavor to the film that I could see being a real feast for a certain type of moviegoer.
It's true. His performance is very strangely pitched. A lot of his dialogue is badly dubbed, assumedly because of his thick Belgian accent. And Honestly, from a modern perspective, like being a person in 2024, the entire phenomenon of Jean-Claude Van Damme as a huge celebrity actor feels like a bit of a I guess you had to be there thing. You know, it's
Yeah.
a little mystifying that this dude is worth $18 million and that like his face should take up 60% of the poster. And yet, there are times where there really is something strangely magnetic about this European fucking weirdo. Like, he's got that very rousing speech to the other AN soldiers that is like kind of electric, where he's like, our superiors say the war is canceled and we can all go home. Our friends will have died here for nothing but...
We can all go home.
I don't know. He's just like, I'm going to kick Bison's ass so hard that the next Bison wannabe is going to feel it. Now, who wants to go home and who wants to go with me? And then, like, I don't know, in that moment, you know? And then also, like, that fight that he has against Bison is not perfect, but he does the fucking flash kick. He does the backflip kick. And he looks fucking like Guile, and like begrudgingly, I kind of get it. I see the vision, you know. He's not American. He's a Coke monster. $8 million is a lot of money, but there's a certain joie de vivre there, so I'm putting it in the B tier.
I get it. It's interesting that I feel like you're kind of going behind the scenes now for your tier placements, specifically referencing the like $8 million that they spent on him. Got me rethinking if maybe I want to replace my current A tier pick with like something like doing $10,000 of coke a week and banging Kylie Minogue in your trailer, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But I'm going to stay within bounds. My A tier pick is, I don't think I've made it any secret that Raul Julia as M. Bison is my favorite thing about this movie. But specifically for my A tier pick, I've got to give it to M. Bison's costume.
Oh, man.
It gets its own credit in the opening titles. And like, while there are many great things about Julia's performance throughout the movie, I really do think that chief among them is just that he has this shit on, you know?
Yeah, no kidding.
It is perhaps, I think, not an exaggeration to say that it is the best real-life realization of a character's costume that I've seen, not just in any video game movie, but in any film adaptation of any pre-existing media. It just looks so good.
It looks so good. And I mean, obviously he was extremely underweight during the filming, but but the magnetism of the performance, his posture, his physicality mixes together with that suit, and yeah, it's really striking.
Yeah, it was designed by Oscar-winning costume designer Marilyn Vance.
It is my honor to put something into the S tier. The obvious thing to put into the S tier, of course, would be Raul Julia's intense and gleeful performance as M. Bison. It is the thing best remembered about the movie, and it's a genuinely wonderful note for that actor to have gone out on. But this is my tier list, and I get to put what I want in my tier list. So in a real heel turn, get ready to jeer me and boo me, because instead I am putting production designer William Kreber into the S tier.
Okay, I'm interested in hearing your support of this, because I did not particularly find myself digging too far into the production design. This one kind of just washed over me. Not super memorable in my experience.
From my very first watch of this movie, the sets were something I was absolutely in love with. I think every tiny little detail is just perfect. Like if the scene is taking place in like a smoke-filled underground Thai fight club, or like a murky dungeon where prisoners are being chained up and whipped, or like even just something like the inside of a little crowded news van, it all feels like very timeless, classic Hollywood to me. Like to me, what it reminded me of was like the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie, which similarly was heavily praised for having that kind of like joy of classic Hollywood thing going on with the way that it did like temples and tombs. And a lot of this movie takes place inside of Bison's big subterranean evil lair, and I just think it's a really fun space to be in. You've got cave walls, red scaffolding, red pipes, a huge wall-sized mosaic of television screens that he's watching things on. There's catwalks. There's locker rooms where the grunts go, and the lockers are like bad guy red lockers. Just like so many great little details. And on my second watch, I started really thinking, like, who the fuck designed and built all these sets? And when I looked this guy up, William Krieger, this guy was a total legend. He started his career in the 60s. He did art direction and production design on The Greatest Story Ever Told, The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure, which is like the canonical classic Hollywood adventure movie. And he even did the fucking art design on Planet of the Apes. The fucking
Wow.
The Statue of Liberty in the sand. That's this guy.
That was him. That's crazy.
And I mean, this movie to me, I just think it looks like a classic Hollywood adventure movie. And the reason it does is because it was done by the guy who helped codify the images we have when we think classic Hollywood adventure film. And I really do think Street Fighter was like some of his finest work. I think the places they're in look awesome. I love them. Damn,
if I ever put this one on, I guess I will have to like watch it with a bit of a bit of a sharper eye for some of the production design, because I don't know, it didn't really make much of an impression on me compared to the last two movies we watched.
I'm a sucker for that shit though. I love practical builds and that kind of stuff.
Do you want to get into our ratings?
Yeah, let's score this thing. I want to hear where you come down on some of these. We use the 1990s GamePro magazine scoring system broken down in the categories of graphics, sound, control, fun factor, and challenge. Why don't you start us off? Where are you coming down? You got a 1 to 5 scale for the graphics.
Well, I think your S tier pick was a pretty good transition into that. And I've already talked a little bit about how I feel about the way this movie looked. I thought it was just maybe a little like surprisingly visually bland for me, especially compared to the previous two movies we watched. I didn't find Shadaloo to be like as interesting a place to spend time in as New Angeles or Dino Hatton.
Sure.
And I found Bison's headquarters to be kind of unmemorable and a little by the numbers. The main thing preventing this score from being even lower for me is Bison's costume. But I also appreciated that the console Bison uses to trigger the traps around his hideout is essentially just like a Street Fighter game cabinet. That was a pretty cool visual flourish to me. I realize I didn't say the number at the score up top, but I'll say it now. I'm going to give this a 2 for graphics.
I always do my score at the end of the talking anyway, so.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe I'll try and do that going forward.
Yeah, I've already gushed how much I love the production design and the art direction, and I think the costuming worked better for me overall than it seemed to have for you. I think everybody looks pretty on brand. The practical effects are good. The special effects are good. I think the movie's well lit. It's mostly pretty well shot. I'm going to dock some points here where it comes to the staging and the action. I think Steven D'Souza, it shows you're watching a movie by a first-time director at times. And the fights, what are here, are so over-edited. Like every little punch or movement seems to be its own shot, and there's nothing gets a chance to breathe once the actors start fighting. I could see going as low as a 3.5 here for me, but the stuff that I like so much. I'm going to go all the way up to a 4.0 just on the production design and the costuming.
All right. Next up, we've got sound. Do you want to go first for sound?
Yeah, the score here, Graham Revell, it's pretty good. It's not great. It's fully orchestrated. It's got some good kind of B adventure movie charm. Some of it sounds a little like made for TV to me. The couple of moments of licensed music that never work for me, like that stuff always pulls me out of these movies so far. There's definitely some bad dubbing here, especially in a lot of the exteriors. The mix, I think, in this movie is not very good. I think there's times where the dialogue gets a little bit swallowed, and I don't think the sound effects are particularly sharp. Maybe the music cues aren't quite popping the way they need to. I will go down to a 2.5 for sound. Sorry to say, was not wowed.
Cool. Well, the most memorable sonic element of this movie to me is Jean-Claude Van Damme's atrocious line readings. And I spent a decent amount of time thinking about how much I wanted to let that impact how I scored the sound for this movie. and I eventually decided that it was a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give this one a 1.5 on sound.
Wow.
I don't even really remember any licensed music in this thing. One thing I did kind of like, I don't know if I'll say I liked it, but I did kind of notice it, was during like the sequence of several licensed songs that they played over the credits. There was kind of like interspersed between them was a little bit of like narration from like what is the military organization?
The Allied Nations.
It was like somebody hosting a show on Allied Nations Forces radio saying like, here's a new hit that everybody loves and stuff like that. And I thought
Dude,
that was...
not only is it just somebody, that man,
Oh boy.
Trevor, is Adrian Cronauer, who was he was the funny disc jockey for the American Army in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
The movie Good Morning Vietnam was based on his life.
Wow. And they got him.
Robin Williams played him in that movie.
There's a few, I feel like, crazy little moments of attention to detail like that throughout this thing that kind of shocks me.
Yeah, it's so weird that that's really the guy.
Like, you didn't need to do that for the Street Fighter movie. You didn't need to get that guy.
He went so hard.
Yeah.
Nobody was expecting you to.
Yeah. Next, do you want to tell me how you felt about what's next?
Control.
Control? Yeah, okay. Control.
Yeah, we use this as a way to analyze the video gaminess of the movie. How video gamey is the movie?
I'll actually go first here because you went last time.
Yeah, go for it.
I actually think there are a lot of video game like sequences throughout this thing. Like, not a lot of fighting necessarily, but like during the scenes where, say, Guile is leading assault on M. Bison's base, like with his boats and stuff. Yeah, I feel like I'm playing a video game for sure. So I'm going to give this one a 4 actually on Control.
I don't think this movie's trying to feel like a video game most of the time. I think it's trying to feel like an adventure serial. I think it's trying to feel like a classic war movie or a James Bond movie. I think at times it's trying to feel like, Batman 1967 TV show. And I think it does a really good job emulating those things. There is one very good camera setup. When Guile and Bison are like about to face each other down, the camera gets right into profile and it sets them up like they're in a Street Fighter round.
That was a nice touch.
But that shot lasts for about 3 seconds and none of the fighting happens during that shot. Bison's floating chair thing with the arcade panel. There's a good amount of fan service here. They're doing some of the moves,
Yeah.
Guile does the flash kick. Honda does the 100-hand slap. Bison does the Psycho Crusher. I think the costumes are pretty on model. It's a mixed bag here. Maybe I'm being a little generous, although I am in lower than you. I'll give it a 3.5.
Okay. And lastly, we've got the fun factor. How much fun we had watching this movie.
Let me explain about myself that I enjoy schlock.
Yeah.
I like schlock.
Yeah.
And schlock comes in many different flavors. You've got so bad it's good schlock. So you've got an inept filmmaker who's doing such a bad job at making a movie that it becomes unintentional comedy. You've got people who are being like ironic, trying to make a bad movie, like Black Dynamite, I think is an example of that. And then you've got something like this, which is more like, I've already mentioned it, Batman 67. It's campy.
Yeah.
Obviously Steven D'Souza is a witty guy, and he is trying to make a certain kind of B movie here in a reasonably self-aware way. And I laughed more times than I can reasonably list here. I feel like there's a real wit to D'Souza's script here. I love Raul Julia here. He's an absolute joy. He's got great big psycho eyes. He's doing the fucking Mussolini posture. Here we might as well mention the thing we've mentioned over and over again. There's a very famous line of dialogue in this movie when Chun-Li basically comes clean to Bison about why she wants him dead, that his men had invaded her village when she was a child, killed her father, and she's here to take her revenge. And he says, "I don't remember." She's shocked by that, and he delivers kind of an immortal line where he says, "To you, the day that General Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life, but to me, it was Tuesday."
Hard as hell line.
Ice cold.
So your fun factor score, what is that? What does all that boil down to?
Okay, look, if the fights were good, this would be a 5.0.
Wow.
It's that close to being about as much fun as I have at movies. I'm still going to give it a big boy score, and I'll stand by it. I'm going to give it a 4.5.
All right. Yeah, very generous. I think, like I said, how much fun you're going to get out of this movie is definitely going to vary. Like, if you're a big fan of campy performances and like terrible line readings and cheesy scripts, I could easily see somebody having a lot of fun with this movie.
It's a feast for that stuff for sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not really one of those people. And in this instance, I feel like my rating needs to be reflective of my own experience. So I'm going to give this movie a 1.5.
Wow.
I got maybe a mild buzz off of the stuff that you're talking about. But just in general, a movie like this isn't really my idea of a good time at the cinema.
I mean, yeah, speak your truth. Yeah, I do think that this is something we've experienced before in our media tastes. Like, I remember when you were watching the Saw movies, which I also find to be delightful schlock, that you were sort of like, yeah, I see what they're doing. I'm not having a great time.
The Saw stuff is a little more palatable to me than something of this ilk, I would say.
It's very Batman 67, though. If that's the kind of camp you like, I think you could have a good time with this.
Definitely a feast for the camp fans.
Challenge.
Yes.
We're no longer on our 1 through 5 metric for the category of challenge, which of course we just mean how hard is it to get through Street Fighter.
Yeah.
We use a scale that goes beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert.
And then adjustable, which we haven't had to pull out yet. I'll be interested to see if we ever do.
We'll see.
So for this one, I'm going to stick with intermediate, I think. Like I said, this movie might be an easy enough watch if you're really vibing with its particular brand of camp, but I was not. I did find Raul Julia's performance to be something of a life raft, though. And, I did enjoy Jean-Claude Van Damme in some capacity. So I'm going to stick with intermediate. I can't go up to advanced, but it was definitely, I had to fight to stick with this one.
I watched it 2 times this week, and I think I had a better time on my second watch than my first because I kind of knew where everything was going and knew the characters. I had a blast. I had a blast both times. I might even watch it again this week. I have a friend who wants to see it. This is about as a beginner as it's going to get for me. No challenge.
So we've already talked about you playing a little bit of Street Fighter 6 last year, but I know that's something you're trying to do for the program is spend a little bit of time with each of the games that we cover adaptations of in advance of sitting down and talk about the movies. So were you able to play any of Street Fighter 2, I guess you would have been trying to play for this one?
I went back and I played Street Fighter 1.
Okay.
And I am about to shock you. I beat Street Fighter 1.
What is that? What did that even entail back in the day?
So Street Fighter 1 is definitely real. We haven't quite figured it out ours for Capcom.
Yeah.
The roster is a real head scratcher. Most of these characters, like, who the fuck are these guys? Sagat is the last boss, so there's that. And you play as Ryu, so there is that.
Uh-huh.
You only play as Ryu.
Wow, I didn't know that. I thought you could choose whoever you wanted.
That's right. I think you can do a 2-player mode, and that's when Ken comes in, because 2-player will be Ken and you'll fight him.
Gotcha.
But the other ones are these dudes. Joe, Mike, Lee.
Hell yeah.
Just a bunch of who the fuck are these guys?
Those sound like classic dudes, though. Joe, Mike, and Lee. Like, just based on their names, like, I want to hang out with those guys more than, like, Balrog,
Right.
Like, these guys sound like more my speed.
I sat down with this fucking thing, and I was like, I just kept dying over and over and over again to the first guy, and I was like, I'm not going to stop until I beat this guy. And the first thing I did, of course, was quarter circle forward punch to see if I could throw out a Hadouken, and I couldn't.
Much like in this movie, the Hadouken does not make an appearance.
Only it does. I mean, not in this movie, but in Street Fighter 1, it was like an unadvertised secret, and the timing is totally different. I figured it out by happenstance. You, at the same time, hold down punch and do the quarter circle forward, and he releases a Hadouken. And the game is not balanced for this at all. So then I proceeded to just fucking tear through Street Fighter 1 no one could stop me.
Well, I mean, that's realistic, right? If you were to enter a like street fighting tournament and all of a sudden you could just emit blasts of energy out of your palms,
Yeah.
you'd have that thing wrapped up in a walk. You know, nobody would be able to touch you.
I did die the first time. I lost to Sagat when I got to him the first time. And then I just thought, for shits and giggles, I'll try it again. And I figured out that if I just kind of like waited until he jumped and then let it out, it would catch him every time. And I beat Street Fighter 1. Imagine how cool you would have seemed in 1987 on 25 cents to fucking roll credits on Street Fighter 1. I was born in the wrong era.
Yeah, you could have run those arcades.
Yeah, Street Fighter 1, it's a game. I can't necessarily recommend it to you unless you're really curious about the origins of the franchise, though.
Well, while we're talking about games, let's do a segment that is quickly becoming one of my favorites on the show.
Oh, a big fave of mine, that's for sure.
I think we're currently calling it what type of game would this be if it wasn't a game before it was a movie, but then became one?
Yeah, that's right.
You know, the point of the segment is basically what we say in the title. We're figuring out what type of video game this would be if it wasn't already a video game, but it was then adapted one into one.
Imagine if it wasn't and you went to see this movie and you'd be like, why the fuck is this called Street Fighter?
And if I were shown this movie and then tasked with turning it into a video game, it definitely wouldn't be a 2D fighting game. I think it would be something much more like a third-person technical espionage thriller action game, not unlike your Metal Gear Solids, maybe.
Oh, sure.
You would obviously play as Guile. You would get to do a mix of like older, over-the-shoulder shooting stuff with some like martial arts sequences thrown in.
Yep.
But I think more importantly than the gameplay, though, the game would really need to aspire to match the same tone as the movie. Particularly, its voice acting needs to have the same levels of bad as Van Damme's line deliveries in the film.
Oh, I agree completely.
I don't think you'd be able to get Van Damme back to return to voice Guile just because they wouldn't be willing to put down the money for it. Most importantly, you could totally make Guile fuck both Chun-Li and Cammy in the game, which I think that would beat Grand Theft Auto and God of War in introducing that mechanic by like a whole 15 years,
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure. What's the first video game with the fucking mechanic in it? Does anybody know?
I'm not enough of a gamer to tell you. So that's Street Fighter the movie. What are we watching next week, Dylan?
Oh yeah, are you still virginal? You don't know what the roadmap is here?
I've not looked at the list. I don't know what we're going to be covering until like I imagine we'll get to the Resident Evil movies and the Tomb Raider movies like in a bit, because I think those are still another like 5 or 6 years off, maybe.
Totally.
But what's next?
So if Street Fighter didn't slake your thirst for punching and kicking, then perhaps the patron saint of video game adaptation cinema himself, director Paul W.S. Anderson, will.
Oh, already? Okay.
When we watch 1995's Mortal Kombat!
Boy, straight from Street Fighter into Mortal Kombat. I had forgotten that this was adapted back in the day. I knew that there was a much more recent adaptation, which I think people kind of enjoyed when it came out. But
my understanding of 95 Mortal Kombat is that it has its fucking defenders. I think that until the modern era, a lot of people look to this as the best video game movie.
I have to imagine there's going to be more fighting in this one. I feel like there's going to actually be some fighting, like from the opening scene. I'm ready to be wrong.
They might find a fucking way to make this movie about whatever, Sub-Zero trying to penetrate, Goro's army or whatever. I don't know. You never know.
I'll put down right now on the table, I bet $50 that this movie will have no less than 40% more fighting than the Street Fighter movie. Book it.
Oh boy, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see some real yah-yahs.
Well, we will, and next week our listeners can hear about it.
But until that day comes, for now, I have been Dillon Flynn.
I have been Trevor Ickrath.
Bidding you so long, Gay Bowser.
This has been a production of
The Lighthouse Keepers Company.
Culture illuminated.